All right, let's dive in. Today we're deconstructing the Gospel of Mark. It's the shortest, the most action-packed, and, as we're about to find out, very likely the first story ever written about the life of Jesus. So let's get right to it. You know, if you look at the other Gospels, they kind of ease you in with birth stories or long family trees. Not Mark. Mark just hits the ground running. There's no introduction, he throws you right into the deep end. It really feels less like a book and more like a movie trailer for Jesus' ministry. In fact, the entire feel, the entire pace of this book, it all kind of boils down to one single recurring word. And that word is immediately. I'm not kidding, the frequency is just wild. The author uses this word or something just like it over 40 times. Jesus immediately goes here. He immediately calls his disciples. They immediately drop their nets and follow him. It all adds up to this breathless, nonstop pace where you feel like you can't even catch your breath. And this isn't just, a weird habit the author had. This relentless, urgent pace is totally intentional. It's what makes the story feel less like someone looking back on the past and more like you're right there, watching it all unfold in real time. So, all this urgency, this unique style, it begs the question, right? Who on earth wrote this thing, and who are they writing it for? To figure that out, we've got to put on our detective hats and start following the clues that are hidden right inside the text. Okay, so first question, the big one. Who wrote this thing? You'd think there'd be a signature somewhere, right? A name at the top, but nope. The original text has nothing. It's totally anonymous. That's right, that title we all know, The Gospel According to Mark, that was actually slapped on there by the church way, way later. So if the book itself is silent, we have to look for clues somewhere else. We have to find some witnesses. So our first witness comes from a very early Christian writer, a guy named Papias, and he claimed that the author was a man named Mark who worked as an interpreter for the Apostle Peter. His job was to carefully write down all of Peter's memories and sermons about Jesus. I mean, just think about that for a second. When you read the Gospel of Mark, you might actually be getting Peter's firsthand memories. How cool is that? Okay, so we have a pretty good suspect for the author, but the next clue is just as important. Who was he writing for? And this is where it gets really interesting, because the author left behind these little clues, almost like fingerprints, all over the text that point to a very specific group of people. You can see these clues plain as day if you know where to look. For instance, the author keeps pausing to explain really basic Jewish customs, which, hey, if you're writing for a Jewish audience, you would never need to do. He also translates Aramaic words, which was Jesus' native language, and he even sprinkles in Latin words. When you put all those fingerprints together, they point to a non-Jewish audience, almost certainly people living in the Roman Empire. Okay, so this next part is really the heart of our whole investigation. We've got an author, we've got an audience, but where does Mark fit in with the other Gospels? Well, there's a powerful theory that scholars have been wrestling with for centuries, the theory that Mark wasn't just another story, it was the blueprint. But how do we know? I mean, really, how can we be so sure that Mark came first? Well, it's not a guess. The proof is actually baked right into the text itself when you start comparing it to the others. The evidence really pops when you put these Gospels side by side. First off, look at the length. Mark's is the shortest. Matthew and Luke take his stories and just expand on them. Mark's writing style is kind of rough, simple Greek. Theirs is much more polished and refined. He also includes these really hard stories, like the disciples just constantly failing to understand Jesus, that Matthew and Luke tend to soften or even cut out entirely. Even his theology seems earlier. He usually calls Jesus teacher, while the others prefer the more elevated title, Lord. It just makes way more sense that someone would take a rough draft and polish it, right? Rather than taking a polished story and making it rougher. The simplest answer here is that Matthew and Luke were working from Mark's original. Okay, so what's the big deal? Who cares if Mark came first? Why does that even matter? Well, it matters because if this is the first raw draft of the Jesus story, it tells us something incredibly important. It matters because for Mark, you don't really find out who Jesus is from a fancy birth story or some big eloquent sermon. No, for him, you discover Jesus' true identity through his path of suffering. He is, first and foremost, the suffering Son of God. And you see this raw, unfiltered picture all over the place in his gospel. His own disciples, they're constantly clueless. They just don't get it. The crowds love him one minute, and then they're gone the next. And the religious authorities are against him from the start. In Mark's telling, almost nobody really understands who Jesus is. It's not until the very end, at the cross, that the pieces finally click and his true identity is revealed. And really, that's the key thing to take away from all this. Mark's lack of polish is exactly what makes it so powerful. It's not clean, it's not perfect, but man, it feels real. So if you want the rawest, most immediate, and earliest story of Jesus we have, you gotta start with Mark. And that leaves us with one last really challenging question to think about. If this is the raw, unpolished original, what exactly did the later authors feel the need to polish? What did they change? And maybe the most important question of all, why?